All right. I didn't even count down. We're just gonna hit it. I forgot to put the timer on. Me and StreamYard. But good evening, everyone or anyone that's tuning in for the live version of our second installation of Decolonizing Reproductive Care and Family Policing Systems webinar series. This is hosted by the DC Child Justice Coalition. And just heads up, I have little people in the background that may come in every once in a while and disrupt. But we will keep the party going in any case. So again, this is part 2 of our series. I'm very excited about tonight's guest speaker, Joyce McMillan. I love everything she stands for. I had the honor and pleasure of listening or of witnessing or observing or participating in the Upend conference recently, which was an abolitionist and for the family policing system, particularly the child welfare system. And of course, Joyce just told the truth. And when we spoke for such a long time. Just so grateful at her openness with her own lived experience, navigating through these carceral and violent systems that don't honor family presence. And we hope that you all really feel free to ask questions. I'll try and pull it up in the chat. And I look forward to a lively dialogue. We have people in the studio here, so they may not be on camera at all points, but we're very excited to have them. So I just want to, we typically, last time we had our wellness moment with Mama Fari, who was not able to join us tonight. And we, my little person, I'm just going to give me a moment to boot him out here for a second. Sorry about that. My little human here. So this webinar series, again, is presented by the DC Child Justice Coalition. We're a coalition of social justice seeking organizations. I am dually stationed organizationally as part of the coalition in Chiborn Free, which is an opportunity to politicize the work that we do on our nonprofit end, which is called FixPat. And we work to support neurodivergent pregnant people and families with children with disabilities or multiply generationally impacted disabled families, birth to 8 years old, at least in our inception. We do honor the lifespan. We honor the journey throughout life. And we welcome anyone that's on this journey with us. So, and specifically for the Child Justice Coalition, we are here together with other organizations, namely Serve Your City, Ward 6 Mutual Aid Network, which is right here in Washington, D.C., and Black Swan Academy, which is a youth abolitionist organization that we're proud to partner with, and also participate in the Police Free Schools Coalition that they also initiate. We'll welcome any organizations locally, nationally, internationally that align with our center, which is political education, and our themes are around reproductive justice, disability justice, and of course, racial justice. So this particular series, we want to deepen understandings for our communities of caregivers and anyone that's tuning in that wants to learn more about what abolition is, particularly when it comes to the family policing systems. I like to pluralize that system. I know we're going to center our dialogue tonight on the child welfare system. But, as we discussed last session, and if you have not gotten a chance, please check out session 1. You can find session 1 archived in any of the live streaming tools we're using. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, and we are on YouTube. So you can find us just by, looking us up on YouTube by the title of this series. So we are deepening thoughts on abolition, captive maternal, disability justice, of course, family policing systems. As I was saying, we pluralize the concept because we recognize that families are being policed in multiple systems, and there's no worse system than the egregious family separation that happens through the child welfare system. And of course, all of this has everything to do with reproductive justice, which we defined as Dorothy Robbins explains it, is not just our right to abort, which we 100% support and endorse and promote, but it also means the right to have children and have those children cared for in loving communities. And we're going to get into a lot of the policy questions tonight around what is happening with reproductive rights, why it's under such severe attack in this iteration. But before we do that, I just want to kind of orient ourselves in terms of concepts of wellness. Last time we had Fari, one of our key fighting mothers, come up here and share with us with a wellness moment. Tonight, Fari is not available, so we are just going to talk about concepts. A key concept here, which is caregiver burnout. We know that caregiver burnout is real. And I just found this definition on clevelandclinic.org. I will say that if you go look at caregiver burnout on this clevelandclinic.org website, it does promote, go see a professional. That includes a social worker, that includes a licensed psychologist. And we're going to unpack some of the challenges of actually seeking support for burnout from these carceral systems, because unfortunately, not all social workers, not all psychologists and other people are equipped to support our families and may actually end up harming our families. And we're going to get in deep with that. So I didn't actually print that out as one of the tips offered, but I think it's an important concept that it affects so many of us in caregiving roles. Oftentimes, caregiving is only talked about when we're thinking about elderly care, but those of us in the disability justice space know that caregiving is, and any parent, anybody that's mothering anybody right now knows that caregiving is a pervasive concept throughout the lifespan. And many of us are in the sandwich generation, caring for young people and our elders at the same time. But burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. It may be accompanied by a change in attitude from positive and caring to negative and unconcerned. Burnout can occur when caregivers don't get the help they need, or if they try to do more than they are able physically or financially. Many caregivers, experience guilt. Many caregivers experience substance use disorders. Many caregivers experience other mental health challenges like stress, fatigue, anxiety, depression, and they may be compounded traumas with pre-existing conditions that you have. I know burnout well. I burn my candles at all kinds of ends. So it's very important. And I have a diagnosis that I must manage my anxiety and depression. So we all experience this in fluidity and inconsistency, all depending on our neurological makeup. And I just encourage everybody to take care of themselves, particularly in this COVID era where this image here shows a rising need for care. The caregiving is typically unpaid labor, but it is extremely laborious, and the need for family caregiving has increased as people's health challenges have also increased in the COVID era. So just some quick tips before we bring in our brilliant guest here. We hope that you just find a space to accept your own feelings. Don't judge yourself. That's one helpful tip. Write out your frustrations, write out your negative feelings. Talk out your negative feelings with a trusted peer, a trusted advisor, a trusted person that you know is not going to mandated report you or not. If that trusted person happens to be a licensed person, make sure that you're protected as you share everything. Make sure that the trusted person is actually trustworthy. And we hope that you know your limits. right? It's really important to know your boundaries. No is a complete sentence. Accept it when other people give it, so that when you say no, those boundaries are also respected. So that's enough. Talking about our burnout. And we know that part of burnout, let me just say one last thing about burnout. We know that burnout is so pervasive in caregiving and mothering and loving and parenting. And we know that a lot of our families are considered neglectful because we're too poor to afford the support and the help to manage times when we need a break. This is a central theme of our dialogue tonight. This is part of how we understand reproductive justice. And to this end, I want to introduce our speaker and get this screen off so we can bring up Joyce McMillan. I just want to say a few wonderful things about Joyce. Joyce, I'm going to pull you up. And I'm just going to talk about you while you're here and your beautiful self there. But Joyce McMillan is a thought leader, an advocate, an activist, community organizer, an educator. Her mission is to remove systemic barriers in communities of color by bringing awareness to the racial disparities in systems where people of color are disproportionately affected. Joyce believes the conversation about systemic oppressions must happen on all levels consistently before meaningful change can occur. She completed a restorative certificate program at New School and believes change will not happen independently of healing, which is, I hope we get deeper and deeper into this evening. Her ultimate goal is to abolish systems, not restore them just singularly, not amend them, abolish, completely end systems of harm while creating concrete community resources, which is really important. You can check out even more about Joyce's bio on the website, JMAC for Families, which is her organization. And I just love this picture, which is so powerful, it hits you right when you come on the website. And I just want to say a little bit about JMAC for Families. They believe that the child welfare system or the family regulation system, the family policing system, does not keep children safe. Over surveillance of families by mandated reporters with implicit biases and the criminalizations of poverty lead to involvement in the family regulation system. Their mission here is to abolish the reporting system, and I hope, Joyce, you get deeper into the campaign to have a Miranda rights for families, and that is a key step in the direction of ending mandated reporting and to redefine child welfare in a way that we support families truly and honestly and with integrity. So before we continue, I want to remove this. I don't know if you can help me remove this. Oh, there we go. From the screen. And Joyce, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to mute myself and remove myself and give you and the ASL interpreter. We'll come back up and we'll have a dialogue, but I just want to give you a chance to present. However, take as much space as you want. And thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. It was so great meeting you. I'm so grateful that the universe brought us on that call together through UpIn, and that we were able to connect, and that it led to me being here with you today and the other wonderful people who took time to be on this call in this late evening. So I'm a parent who was impacted by the child welfare system, and that led me to doing the work that I do today. I was impacted many years ago in 1999 when a call was placed on my family, and I cooperated with our local CPS agency in New York, known as the Administration for Children's Services, or by their acronym, ACS. It appeared to me that their quote unquote investigation was going well, I guess, from my limited understanding of what they do. And I was asked to take a urine test, which I did, and then my children were removed. A urine test is not a parenting test. It does not speak to a person's ability to care for their children. It does not say that they put their children at risk. It does not say that the person will abuse their child. It does not say that children won't or don't have the things that they need. So, my experience would tell me that the urine test defined for them who they believed I was and who they believed I was capable of being, and whether or not that included being capable to be a parent to my children. My children were removed, and it took 2.5 years to have them returned to me. It was the most difficult time of my life. The substance that I was using when they came into my life was a substance I had used since I was maybe about 12 or 13 years old. I remember being very young. It was just what the teenagers in my neighborhood did. And I continued to use that substance throughout my adulthood. And it was that substance that led to my children being removed. It spent me into an immediate depression, led me to become addicted to a substance, caused me to lose my job, my housing, my credit score, and everything else that I had built up in life. So when CPS says that they're there to help, I say they are liars. Help is not help if it does not help. And there's nothing they can show to me then or today that they did that helped me or my children. What they did was create trauma, long-lasting trauma, stress, aggravation, frustration, and additional levels of mistrust for systems in America that impact families of color disproportionately. And for me, it wasn't just that experience that led me to becoming an organizer and an advocate for change. It was subsequent experiences that occurred or subsequent interactions with that same agency that occurred that led me to do some research, to gain a better understanding of who they were, what their purpose was, and to show that they were not reaching the mark because they said they were there to protect children. And as I look at the outcomes for children who have entered the foster system, it is very clear to me that the only thing they protect children from is success. The first time I did research to find out who this agency was, I had access to the data in New York City, where I live at, from the website of our local CPS office. And what it showed me is that there are no CPS offices in any neighborhoods outside of Black, brown, and poor neighborhoods. And that poverty is often confused with neglect purposefully, and that the outcomes for many children who spend time in the foster system and for parents who have children removed from them, ultimately, both of them end up incarcerated at some point, many times, especially the children. I would say about close to 75% of the time, children who spend time in foster care end up incarcerated. Which leads me to think about the parallels between incarceration and the foster system. When Child Protection Services knock on your door and enter your home, most oftentimes without a court order and without you knowing your rights. One of the first things they do is ask you to take the clothes off of your children for them to check for marks and bruises. But most often, the calls are not related to abuse. So I'm not sure why they are strip searching the children. In addition to strip searches that happen both in the foster system and incarceration, they're both separated from everything, everyone they know and love. They both have set visit times on set visit days. They both eat what they are served. They both have oversight during the visit period. They both change homes and cells regularly. They both use garbage bags or pillowcases to change locations. And we could go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop there about what the similarities or the parallels are between these two systems. But most importantly, they also use the same language. And part of that language is parole. If the child is lucky enough to be released from state custody, or a person who is incarcerated is lucky enough to be released from state custody, they both are paroled back to either the family or the community. And during the parole period, they both have oversight. Any system built to protect children should in no way mimic a system that tortures adults. And so, comprised with the data that showed there was no CPS officers outside of Black and brown and poor communities, and the outcomes of children and families that enter this system, I began to understand we have labeled the system wrong when we say the system is a pipeline from foster care to prison. It is not just a pipeline, it is a prerequisite, meaning a purposeful training. They know that children in the foster care system are not graduating high school. They know that they are often becoming teenage parents, aging out of the system, leaving their own children behind. They have developed mental health issues from the abuse that happens in the system, and many other negative things that does not speak to a person growing up to be healthy members of society and having success in their life. They are setting children up to fail so that they can be the next generation of incarcerated people, which is why we have mass incarceration, because through the 13th Amendment, the Constitution's 13th Amendment, the only way to have slaves in this country is through being incarcerated, is by being incarcerated. And so there's no wonder that we have mass incarceration, because America has always been about slavery and free labor. Prisoners essentially provide free labor. And so they have created this system and masked it as a helping system when they know they don't help anyone but the system to maintain the status quo of creating poverty and communities that struggle for equity, peace, and some type of power to help ourselves be all that we know we can be as young kings and queens. And so I'm going to stop there. I don't know who my audience is, but I don't know if we want to take questions. Yes, come back on. Help me out here. Where we at? Sis? Where we at?
Thank you so much for that share. So I'm going to pull up, a couple people that have joined us in the audience here, and they're going to introduce themselves as we'll get into some dialogue here. I know there's lots of questions, and where is Lindsay? There's lots of questions for everyone. So Myra and Shanta, please come on camera if you can. If not, would love to feature you guys. If you just self-introduce. Hi. If you guys want to self-introduce, we could start with Lindsay, then Myra, then Shanta.
Yes.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lindsay Jones Renault. Thank you so much for that, for your testimony and for your story. This is my daughter Amelia, who's trying to join as well.
Hi, Amelia. How are you?
Good.
Hey.
Um, I'm a mom of two and a big supporter of Chioma and her work, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Maya?
Myra. I think you're on mute. I can unmute you.
I was getting unmuted. So my name is Tomorrow, but I like to be go by Myra because that's what my parents call me. I am a recent law school graduate. I'm a holistic health advocate, and I am here to learn, but most importantly, speak critically about the things that I've experienced um, within these social institutions, personally and professionally. Hearing your story, Joyce, every time I get into the spaces with Chai and her friends, I just get fired up. I like the way that you didn't mince your words. That you were very direct about what is really happening and questioning why are these procedures in place. I never even thought about it. Yes, we want to make sure that the children are safe, but why are you performing? Why are you stripping them completely of their clothes to review abuse, right? Are we not evaluating psychologically the historical connection, especially with melanated bodies, of that stripping of authority to our own bodies? So when you said that, like my heart just went to my stomach because I'm like, wow, sometimes the abuse is right in our face and we don't even see it. So thank you for bringing us all into that space to really see what's happening. Um, my question to you in, in your journey and seeing how you moved. I'm sorry, Chai, can I ask questions yet? Or I was just supposed to do
Yeah,
introduction?
let's let Shanta introduce, and also going to
Okay,
pull up
my bad.
Deirdre. So
Yes.
Shanta and Deirdre, and then we'll get into the dialogue. And I just want to also shout out our interpreters, Christina and Antonio, who are graciously supporting us with ASL interpretation tonight. Thank you guys. Okay, Shanta. Shanta is a caregiver and she may be in a caregiver space. I'm just going to leave a chat for Shanta when she's able to come back and introduce. So we're going to go to Deirdre and then we're going to get into dialogue.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Deidre Brooks, and I'm the Director of Outreach and Programs for JMAG for Families. I'm so happy to be a part of this conversation today, and I look forward to your questions and supporting this very critical conversation.
Hey, Deirdre. My right hand, my other right hand.
All right. So, Myra, go ahead. I know you had a burning question, so go for it.
Shai, you said we can ask questions now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Joyce, with may I ask how old were you when they took the urinalysis test?
I was in my late 20s.
You were in your late 20s?
Mm-hmm.
And the request for the test was given right after the call, like immediately, or did they give you prep? Did they interview you after that?
They didn't interview me, but they checked the home, refrigerator, cabinets, drawers, closets, took the clothes of the children off, asked for school information, all of that basic standardized stuff. And then they also, in addition to, asked for the urine test.
The reason I'm asking this because I'm trying to break down how our privacy rights are violated, right? So there's always this thing in law that is kind of this pushing away of constitutional rights and human rights when they use what I like to say certain words. right? We deal with the same thing when we're going through interactions with law enforcement. There are certain rules that police officers are, or I like to call them peace officers now because I'm trying to eliminate that language out of my vocabulary, but for the sake of what everybody else identify them as police officers, there are certain steps, that are ethical steps they're supposed to take to make sure that they're not being invasive or being pushing on anyone's constitutional human rights. So the reason I'm asking this in this particular way is because when I hear what you're saying, the Child Protection Services Agency is literally getting a pass to violate people's constitutional rights.
I'm glad you're mentioning that.
Yes. We often think, well, they're the government, so they're acting in a correct way because this is the law. But when you have two laws conflicting, which one is the superior law? And it's supposed to be the Constitution, but you're saying that this agency can do that. So that's why I'm asking for this time frame. So if they got a call, invaded your privacy, and then performed the test, at what point was your rights preserved?
They weren't.
Simply off a tip.
What I find is that when dealing with the family policing system across the 50 states, there is no due process. And everything is done under the guise of helping. But help isn't help if it doesn't help. Yes. And they can't go back and show how they've helped anyone. They may help a very, 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 very small percentage of people, maybe 2 to 3%, just like only 2 to 3% of their kids go to college. And only 1% of them finish college, right? Because they're not helping. And they will take that 1% and make it seem like, see, look, we did a great job. Here's a college graduate. But that's one of a million. And so finding a college graduate or finding someone who wasn't traumatized or finding someone whose rights wasn't violated is like finding a needle in a haystack when dealing with these agencies. So in New York, I am pushing legislation called Miranda Know Your Rights for families when CPS knocks on the door. And that is to preserve the rights of people's Fourth Amendment that says it is our constitutional right to not let anyone into our home that is a government official without having a court order or a warrant. And how CPS has circumvented that is the same way they circumvent a lot of things. So the police has the same Fourth Amendment restrictions placed upon them. And the exception for both CPS and the police is if there is exigent circumstances, meaning emergency circumstances. And for the police, emergency circumstances would equate to them being outside of your door, Maya, and hearing you scream for help, hearing a gunshot go off, hear a baby crying at the top of their lungs like they're being hurt and you yelling at them. There would be something to say that something out of control is happening in that house and someone may be in danger. That is the same exception that is placed on the Child Protection Service. Our bullshit elected officials are not protecting our rights. And I will say that out loud, right? They say they represent me. They say they care about children, but they don't care about children, because if they cared about children, the first thing they would do is preserve the rights of their family members, their parents, their caregivers, so that children can remain at home safe with their families, because they're at higher risk of having something negative happen to them when they are taken out of the home. The reason that they have supervised visits is not so you don't hurt your child on a visit, because 87% of children who are in care across the 50 states are there for reasons related to neglect, not abuse. So a child's excessive absence from school, no food in the home, left at home with an older sibling, improper clothing for the weather, dirty home, all of these things does not speak to abuse. In fact, they don't even rise to the level of reasons that children should be removed in the first place. So the reason they have supervised visits for a child who was never in danger or at a threat of being in danger is so that the child cannot share with their loved one, their protector, their parent, what's happening to them once they enter this system. It is not to protect the children. It is to protect them from the egregious acts that they are allowing the child to be placed in with impunity. And so the Fourth Amendment is something elected officials have said to me that, oh, If parents know their rights, children are not going to be safe. And our local CPS officer said the same thing. And I'm calling it stinky. It smells like crap, right? And the reason is because not just in New York State, but again, I know across the 50 states, when someone places a call to report a concern about a family, a recording comes on that says, if this is an emergency, hang up and dial 911. The person does not hang up. They stay on the line and wait for a representative. The representative takes that call and they themselves do not deem it to be an emergency. This is now a state representative taking a call. And they don't deem it to be an emergency because they don't hang up and call 911. But then the local CPS office responds in about 48 hours and try to act like they don't know if a child is in grave danger. You know a child is not in grave danger because you know what the call was in reference to, and you know if they were in grave danger, that the call would have been turned into an emergency call and 911 would have been summoned. So it's all a smokescreen, it's all lies, and it's all ways to circumvent what's there to protect us. Protection in this country is not for us, it is for people who don't look like us and those who have more money.
Yeah, I mean, this is all, I mean, it's disturbing, it's scary, but we know that we live it every single day. I think we lifted up, Dorothy Roberts' Torn Apart book. Actually, those that are joining us in the panel discussions for any part of these 3-part series are going to get, half are going to get a copy of Dorothy Roberts' Torn Apart, and the other half are going to get a copy of Joy James's new book, In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love. And, we know that, Dorothy Roberts specifically says that majority of Black parents, Black mothers, particularly Black birthing people, are going to face a child welfare interaction at some point, if not a family separation. I had noted that, I live in an apartment complex that I still live in. I've had neighbors when my children were much younger call Child Protective Service because my children were young and autistic. And, they come in there, they check your refrigerators, they check your cabinets. I mean, they get real invasive, and you never forget that experience. I mean, I've had police knock on the door because they also called the police themselves, but there's nothing, the police doesn't have access to the home. And I know that there are steps in terms of knowing your rights. I realize now I didn't have to give them access into my home to go through the refrigerator, to go through the cabinets, to look at the kid's closet, to talk to the babysitter, all these random things that are just so intrusive. So can you speak a bit about like the work of JMAC and how you help families understand their rights against these invasive things that can do and do lead to deeper investigations that actually can have the child removed from the home, even when there's no threat of abuse? And certainly in the case of neglect, we know the majority of neglect cases are poverty cases and usually misinterpretation of cultural practices. So can you speak on that, please? Joyce and Deidre, anything you guys want to lift up with that?
Deirdre, I'm going to let you rock out on that if you're comfortable.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that question. JMAC for Families, our approach is multidimensional. There's the legislative work that we do. We have a coalition with other organizations working towards abolition called PLAN, and we do legislative work around the registry, around informed consent, around the Family Miranda Bill, which is not just educating and giving the community the political education to understand what's happening and how it's impacting all of us. Supporting parents with lived experience to tell their stories in a way that inspires change in the system. We have our HEAL program, which is a cohort that we do with 15 parents, and we've had 3 cohorts. And through HEAL, we not only address the systemic legacy and the impact of the system, but we interrogate how we've also internalized those things that happen. And I can't tell you how many parents have graduated from HEAL and have found that they've internalized and blamed themselves for a lot of systemic failure. But that narrative was intentionally given by the system, the way the searches are done, the fact that you have that invasion of privacy, that denial or rejection of our humanity and autonomy, all of that is done on purpose to, make you, to coerce you to cooperate with the system as it harms and hurts you. And so through Heal, we interrogate that, and we become advocates for our own freedom against the system, abolition towards the system, and supporting each other, because there aren't really many support spaces. And despite what some people say, that narrative around the inability of Black mothers to care for and support their children is pervasive. And we're challenging that narrative through policy, through direct work, and especially through advocacy. So, legislative work, we're doing political education, we have community that we're building with impacted parents and others, and really trying to create a movement that is national, because this is happening all over, not just in New York. And so these different branches of our work allow us to touch other places, to share what we learned, to share what we know, and connect for collective power. So, nudge Joyce if I left anything out of the work that we're doing.
Nah, I think you covered it really well. When she says multidimensional, it's not just the work that we're doing individually with parents, which we do very little individual advocacy because it's very difficult to, with our small staff, there's only 4 of us, 3 of us are full-time and 1 person is part-time, to take on caseloads of people's experience and follow them through the court process and, their hearings and all of the different things that transpire when they have a case. But what we try to do is to teach them how to advocate for themselves through our HEAL program, which Deirdre runs. And HEAL stands for Heal, Educate, Advocate, and Leadership. And it happens 2 days a week. On the first day, it's kind of a support healing group where people get to talk about their individual cases. And then on the second day, it's more of a symposium style where we've had people like Joy James and Dorothy Roberts and lawyers and social workers and other people come in and share from their professional perspective what this system is founded on and what they can do to help themselves in the best way to address some of the problems they may be having with their cases, and legislation that could shrink how families become involved. And one of the things that JMAC also has is a CAPTA work group, which is the Child Abuse and Prevention Treatment Act, which is turning 50 in the year of 2024. And so 50 years of harm towards family. Mandated reportership lives under CAPTA. What also lives under CAPTA is the how they convolute poverty with neglect. That lives under CAPTA. And there's some other harmful things that live under CAPTA. So we're looking to make noise around the 50th year in hoping to have a group of people large enough representing the 50 states to begin to push to repeal CAPTA, because the surveillance of families is where the harm begins. We're not surveilling anyone else, and our families don't want to be and don't need to be surveillance either. And so that's just some of the work we're doing. But the other work we're doing is to be an example to what it is we want to see from this society in how we work together collectively within the JMAC organization to make sure that self-care is a priority in the number of weeks we get for vacation, our ability to speak to one another and say, I'm feeling distracted because I'm feeling like I have low energy right now. I'm feeling overwhelmed, whatever it is, to have an offset for that, to have each of us have the ability to jump in to support the other one. Just doing things that we believe represent what it means to do this very difficult work with the vicarious trauma that it can bring, the reignition of trauma that you have already experienced could be triggered, and just watching the harms of seeing people experience what I once experienced, this organization puts self care as a priority. And that doesn't mean to negate the necessities that we're here to do to help families and communities, but it means we can't do those important things and the important work that we do if we are not first taking care of ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. That self care piece, we touched on the burnout, and it's so unfortunate to me that the system just doesn't even start with the question of like, how are you doing? Especially when the issue really is about some of the deeper things happening in the family that require compassionate intervention, or even just support in ways that don't look intrusive, invasive, and carceral. So I do want to introduce some terms that, we've gone over some definitions, and I want to introduce the concepts that we've kind of gone over and get you guys response. Myra, join in. Mandolin, yes. Mandolin. So in let me pull this up here. So we're going to first start with family policing system. So I know that on the website, it's, the term family policing system and family regulation system are interchanged, but this is, right up from Upend. And so I know you're very much active in the Upend movement. I'd love for you guys to deepen thoughts around. So it just reads, we use the term family policing system to refer to what has more commonly been known as the child welfare system. We believe this term more accurately captures the role that this system plays in the lives of families, which includes surveillance, regulation, and punishment, all roles associated with policing rather than children's welfare. These roles are used to maintain the control and oppression of Black, Native, and Latinx families, which is also consistent with the practice of policing. So now, particularly the concept of surveillance, I think, sometimes we don't know when we're being surveilled. We don't know nuances of what that means. Schools are obsessed with talking about family engagement. We know that people are watching us in the grocery store and it's called, CPS. We know that there are many avenues in which our families are constantly engaged and monitored and that we just aren't aware of. So if you could please help us deepen for people who've never heard of these terms before, Banjo, please help us understand these terms.
Deirdre?
Absolutely. First, shout out to you for for you doing your thing. Like I love to see the love and care and compassion, because that's exactly what the system says that we don't know how to do. And that family policing, the surveillance, it comes in many forms, and I know that Dorothy Roberts speaks of this a lot in her work, and Joyce as well. They draw those connections about how surveillance is happening, from the drug testing, the getting a report about one thing but coming in and checking all these things that are completely unrelated to what happens afterwards. Even after unsubstantiated reports, families can still be required to engage in certain preventive services, which is a form of surveillance, because then you're going to see social workers, you're going to see all these other mandated reporters who are supposed to be supporting, but are actually monitoring and surveilling you and how closely you follow or align with these prescriptions that they have given you to be a good parent or become a good parent. And so their surveillance is through that programming, which is a reason why some people have developed an aversion to certain things that are intended or supposed to help. But as Joyce has said, it's not helping if it's not helping, right? Or if it's harming. And so that surveillance comes in that form. It comes in the form of having money on pop-up visits and unannounced visits to come in, do inspections. So it varies widely, and it's very insidious in the ways that their surveillance happens. And so, Joyce, I don't know if you want to add anything to that question or that response.
No, I think that's what it is. I just want to shout you out for this platform. This is really awesome. I honestly didn't know what to expect. I came on with an open heart and an open mind, and I just think the conversation is awesome, and the platform that you're using as well. And I love seeing that you have the ASL interpreters. That's really important and special, and I like all inclusive work, and so that's great.
Thank you so much. We definitely have families that are part of the deaf community that we hope to engage in this work. So that's why we lifted. And we're able, so it gives me an opportunity to shout out Diversity Funds, which has given us some funding so we can afford it. We know these things come at cost. And so we're very grateful for that opportunity. I will say this, I am very much, I love my kids. I love my Jedi that keeps disrupting us here. But, I also want to uplift what's happening in real time. Part of why Jedi, why I'm not getting the support that I would need to be able to even host this dialogue and have Jedi be with a loving companion while I'm doing this is because the system just would rather watch me suffer alone. Like, it feels like we are not worthy. I know that there are workforce crises happening, right? They say there's a shortage of all these workers, including social workers, that it's almost to the point where it's easier for me to opt out while I can opt out, right? Because I also test the opting out feature, knowing that I will get services to come in the home. They'd be inconsistent. They can't work the hours that I need help. They pretty much, move in their own way. And when you let anybody into your home, it comes at risk, right? It comes at risk of your surveillance, comes at risk at them not culturally understanding how you mother and you parent in your families. And so I'm going to pull Lindsay up. I think Lindsay has a question. Or do you want me to ask it? Lindsay, I'm going to put you up. You can ask yourself.
Sure. Hi. Thank you all so much. I wanted to ask a question about the way I guess the family policing system is sort of brainwashed to think that we need a professional to address certain situations that really could be addressed within a community by a community. And I can share a quick story. I'm a mom of 2 kids. When one of my kids was younger, she heard something from a friend about something that was happening, and it was kind of raised some concerns. And we had never dealt with this before. So we were like, okay, maybe we should talk to a professional. So we reached out to a professional, and fortunately they told us right away that they may, depending on what they tell us, they may have that they are mandated reporter and they might have to call in, report it to CPS. And I was like, well, we just want to get some advice. And they were like, well, this is the way it is. They're like, okay, well, I'm not talking to you because I don't want to bring that in. And ended up, I talked with ended up being something where folks we all talked with each other. We brought together people in the community and we figured it out. But it had me reflecting on how we're always told this message that certain things we can't handle ourselves. We need to call in a professional, which could then lead to these criminalization things that you're talking about. So I was wondering if you could address that sort of way of thinking, or does that make sense?
It does. And so what I will say about that is the system is designed to capture people. The system is designed to tear people apart or families apart. And so with that, they created mandated reporters to create a stream where they can continuously funnel children into the system. That is the sole purpose of mandated reporters. So at JMAC, we wrote a curriculum called Mandated Supporters that we are now utilizing with some colleges. And the reason why, if you notice, everything they do is contradictory to what makes good common sense, right? Everyone who you should reasonably be able to go to get help, support, or understanding are people who are mandated to report you. Therefore, they're leaving people without the help that's needed because the threat of risking family separation is too high to take the chance. So you hold whatever concerns you have close to your chest and you don't share them with anyone. But I've had therapists call on parents. I've had teachers call on parents. I've even had a dentist call on a parent, right? And so none of this helps the family at all. But these are people, the teacher you should be able to go to and say, hey, I don't have enough food at home. That's why little Johnny ate 2 meals at school today. And that teacher should be able to refer you to a place where you can get some emergency food, some type of pantry or something. A therapist should be listening to you and helping you to work through and find the most healthy resolution to whatever problem that you entered their office to talk about. All of these people should reasonably be there to support families, but instead, they are the biggest threat to families. And when I think about it, because I feel that white people being in the system are a collateral consequence. The system was not designed to capture white bodies, but there are white people who are caught through the system because nothing operates at 100% perfection, right? So with that being said, sometimes, it captures bodies that it wasn't meant to capture. With that being said, whether you're black or white, the harm is the same. But there are also areas that are comprised of white people who live under a certain financial medium who then also become targets of this system. So I like to refer to slavery because I know the first purpose was to capture black bodies. And when I refer it to slavery and I think about mandated reporting, I don't just think about the slavery, I think about how it forces people to hold things close to their chest, which puts us back in a situation where they have to chase us and figure it out and find what we are doing so that they can then punish us, right? It was always a situation during slavery where someone told on you, and that's how you got in trouble. They told that you snuck your child the extra biscuit that night, and you got beat half to death for that. They told that you kissed a man out in the field, right? And that you may be having relationships with them, and you got beat half to death. Everything that happened, someone was surveilling us and telling on us. And if you pay attention to how systems are designed, you will see that they are designed in the same way that slavery transpired. Systems are not just systems, they are the recreation of slavery, which is why I'm about that life of abolition, because you cannot transform or reform this system because this system has safety mechanisms in it to prevent real change. And the only thing you can do is change the name of what you're doing, but the outcome will be the same. As an example, they say children get visits with their parents or parents get visits with their children. And I was like, that's pretty fucked up, right? Sorry for my language, because prisoners also get visits, right? And again, any system that's built to protect children should in no way mimic the same system that was purposefully built. And I highlight that word purposefully built to punish adults, right? But it does. And I told you that early when we started out through the parallels. So you look at this, you look at how it relates to slavery, and you know that it was designed to do the harm that it does. And there's no question about that for me. I started talking about the visits and I went off track for a second because I lost my train of thought. But so when they heard me keep talking about how visits happen in prison and visits are happening in foster care, and I started posting pictures of the visit rooms showing that the visits room in the foster system look just like the visit rooms in the prison industrial complex, they suddenly changed the name to family time. And I'm like, so what? You change the name. You're still causing the same harm. It's still in the same environment, and everything about it is the same. You've only changed the name. And that's what this system is good, or these systems are good on doing, changing the name of something, but continuously having the same outcome, because they want to make it look like they are doing something different. But change has not come in all of these years. And you think about it, they're always talking about change is going to come slow and in slow incremental changes. If something's wrong, why are we taking small steps to fix it? Why don't we just stop doing it? Because slavery is a commodity, and slavery lives within systems.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the term abolition. I want us to, if we can, please unpack it a little bit. So abolition, this is a quote from an interview that Marian Kaba did, I found online, and defines abolition as, this is the gift that abolition as the ideology and the practice is given. It's the idea that the system isn't actually broken, right? Because then I'm not preoccupied with trying to fix it. That's not my goal. All I want to do is abolish and end it. Therefore, the imperatives of what I'm trying to do, the training, the questions, the analysis, all have to be geared towards that. And then this doesn't force me to run around in circles.
Grandma Mommy's house.
Yes, Auntie, plugging my fingers in the dike everywhere as the water is just threatening to overwhelm all of us. Also, this allows me to think of how we can crowd out the current system by building the things we want to see in the world that will promote our well-being. Now, we know that Marian Kaba, is centered around prison abolition. I was so grateful to see that she was present at the Upend conference. And she's kind of like the face of the concept of abolition, but Joyce, so are you, right? But you speak very specifically to how this term is looked at in the family policing system. Can you please help us deepen and center why abolition? How did you come to abolition?
I figured out just what Marian Kaba said. Even before I met and knew who Marian Kaba was, just through my experiences and hearing them say the system is broken. It's not broken. How could it be broken when you designed to do this? And if you think it's broken, if someone has a broken arm, you don't put a one of them spring things on, those pieces of cloth that's brown that you wrap around that you sometimes use for a spring. You don't put that on a broken arm, right? You put a cast on a broken arm. And so the fact that the system is broken, but you want to use something that is going to create an incremental small change that amounts to nothing, says you're trying to keep it working just the way it is, because it's only broken from our perspective in how it's not doing what they tell us it's designed to do. That's where the terminology of broken came from. It came from us saying, they said it was supposed to do this, but it did this. It's broken. It's broken. It's not working. But it's not broken from their perspective. It's doing what it was designed to do. But the fact that they are now trying to co-opt our language and go, I want to be friends with you, Joyce. I want to be friends with you, Shimona. I want to be friends with you, Maya and Deirdre. We agree with you. The system's broken, but it's going to take time to change it. All it takes is taking out those components that's not working. That's all it takes. And the fact that you're acting like it takes some type of rocket science to fix, and fix meaning stop doing harm, it makes no sense to me. If I know every time I step on your foot, I break one of your toes, it's not going to take me 5 times stepping on your foot for you to have an entire 5 broken toes and maybe a broken heel, right? Once I realize stepping on your foot breaks a toe, I'm going to do everything possible to avoid ever stepping on your toe again, because I don't want you to experience that. But they want us to experience exactly what we're experiencing, and that's why they're surveilling us, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. And any system that is purposefully built to cause harm is not a system that can be reformed.
Yeah, whew. Yeah. I mean that's a fact, and I think this is a segue. And I don't know, Myra, Lindsay. I'm sure, Deidre, and I know for sure, Joyce, that you're following what's happening with the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, and what's happening at the Supreme Court. I forget the name of the case, but that it's kind of rooted in a lot of messed up things, right? That there's a white family that, because they have access to wealth, feels it is their right to raise indigenous children. So for me, as an indigenous African, first generation American, I kind of see this in multiple directions. As a black mother in America, because that's all we are, right? We're just black, period. The question becomes like, what does this all mean for black families, right? Generationally impacted African American families that are the key target, principal target, I believe, the child welfare system. And then, of course, we know, like, from the coloniality of what's happening, from this perspective, that they have a whole system kind of set up, that they were successfully able to legislate in an act saying that if the parent cannot parent the child, and opts to get support outside of the home, like, they can get a relative to watch the child, and they don't need to go through all these processes. And if they don't got a relative, they can have the tribe watch this child. I kind of feel kind of sad for black communities, because when I've listened to some of the talks about, like, the tribal cultural appreciation of the community, and the culture kind of picking up and taking responsibility to ensure that the child grows up in a certain framework, right? And how black people have been kind of absorbed of that privilege at all. Like, that's not legislated anywhere that I know of. But just want to get your thoughts on what's happening specific to Indian populations in the U.S., those who are legally defined as Indian nations, and then what's this got to do with black people who are principal targets of this child policing or family policing system?
You good? You want to take a shot at that?
So for me, that's a difficult question to speak to, because a lot of my expertise is lived experience based on my community. I see the parallels in the ways that we've been oppressed, the tactics of white supremacy that are used in both communities to not only harm us, but to divide us, and to create confusion around who we are and what has happened to us historically. There are a lot of parallels in what happens to Black children and what happens to Indigenous children. In a lot of ways, us working together to push for Indigenous nations to have reparations around what happened to them is coupled with our demand to see that for ourselves. And the abolition of this system is just that. I'm glad that the conversation around community came up, because we can see in historical policy, whether it's de jure or de facto, things that came about in history shows how we have been relegated to have to absorb certain treatment because of how people perceived our communities. From the Moynihan report, to the Battered Child Syndrome report by Kemp in the 60s that pathologized us. The question came up about going to see professionals. Well, before professionals came into view, the village was the way that we supported each other. And in 71, when Nixon vetoed the Comprehensive Child Care Act, Child Development Act, saying that it was an attack on the nuclear family, that in itself shows that their policy was an attack on communal communities. We don't relate, we don't raise our families in nuclear families. We've always been about community. And so the war on families, is then ignited with those types of decisions, and further opens us up to be vulnerable, when we're left alone and don't have support with childcare, or even certain resources. It's always been a part of our culture where, you know, my baby having a hard time, send those children down here, send those children up here, and we got them while you get, you know, yourself together. That's my lived experience. You know what I'm saying? But so many children don't get that because of the way the system is set up to entrap and ensnare families who truly need support, instead of intervention by people who don't intend to harm, but who really are feeding into systems that pay certain people to do helping work that's not actually helping. And I think that both of our communities faces that a lot, and we're told the story, and our country is told the story that we're being helped, we're being supported, but that's not actually the case.
And so I will second what Deirdre said. I know there's a lot happening with ICWA, and I'm not in full understanding of everything that happens, but what I do understand is that Indians, people with from indigenous backgrounds, have been under attack the same way that we have. Right? It's always been black, brown, and so I just have to second everything she says, because while that has not been my focus is not on an individual group. My focus is on how systems harm. And what I recognize and acknowledge is that the system has harmed many of us across the board that don't look like European white folk. And those who look like European white folk, who they're either angry at or ashamed of, which is why they punish them so brutally in these rural communities where there are only poor white folk that live, they don't provide them any grace, right? And so it's very clear to see there's a priority set to their agenda: black, brown, and indigenous, and black, brown, and poor. And they have poisoned the indigenous community with alcohol the same way they have poisoned our community with crack. They have utilized the same tactics across the board to provide us what some may feel as coping mechanisms, like when I became addicted to a substance when my children was removed, because it became a coping mechanism. I mean, it was numbing the pain that I was feeling. And so then you're looked at like, just because you're black or brown, you were predisposed to being this. But they never talk about, and they never will talk about or acknowledge how they place that in our community for those moments of the trauma that they bestow upon us. And so they create the problem, and then the what feels like a temporary solution to us, right? The coping thing that we turn to, because we can't even turn to anyone else. We already know that mandated to report, right? A drug doesn't necessarily report on you, and it just allows you to stay quiet to yourself and just try to make it through. And Maya, you want to add something?
Yeah, Myra, go for it.
That was a lot to take in, Joyce and Deidre. Am I saying your name correctly, ma'am? There were so many points that I want to hit, but I'm gonna summarize real quick. First, Joyce, going to your point of like the cultural supervising of the children, right? And that the child welfare system or the family policing system, it mimics the prison system, right? And that those who are put into that particular institution, that they're just getting trained for the imprisonment, right?
Right.
But as someone who has went through the bar exam, who went through law school to get a Eurocentric perspective of justice, right? That's why it's named criminal justice and not justice. Those who are operating in these systems as employees, as supervisors, as administration, they're getting in prison. Their mindset is getting to be in prison as well. So we're all trapped into it. And we keep, I see in the conversations keep being used as the system And it's like the system versus us. We are the system. We are the system. And I know that it's hard. It's a hard pill for us to swallow, but these systems are not these fantasy things outside of us. First, let's make this very clear. It's the illusion of white supremacy, point blank, period. And it came from Europe. This is culturally what is acceptable in predominantly white communities. The things that are happening in our communities are the norm in their communities as well. I think too often in conversation, it is presented as predominantly white communities are healthy communities, right? You can't be the abuser and not diminish and not be feeling the effects of the harm that you're causing. So this is culturally what we have to dissect. And having in the American society, we all at some point, whether you take it as your reality or not, have been touched by this socialization. So we kind of assimilate to it. So we're all the system, because the most of the people in predominantly Black neighborhoods, when we're involving ourselves with social institutions, those employees are Black. Those supervisors are Black.
And then it burn even
homes, it
burns extra. There's an extra burn when the person on the other side judging you, is a Black person and a Black woman, oftentimes, right?
I want to talk about that, because let me tell you, we
we're still
at the house in the field, right? And so you still have them in the house. And if you pay attention, they're in the house because when they leave their office, they don't say we're going into the community. They say we're going into the field. You're leaving your house to go into the field. You are that house.
Language. You're absolutely.
You are that house.
Okay. So when you were explaining that, and Deidre, when you were saying the parallel between our communities, I'm also about decolonizing my mind. We're indigenous people. We're still operating in captivity. We are those indigenous people. No, however far you want to do ancestry.com. We are indigenous people because we are indigenous to something or someplace. So it's not a parallel.
Yeah.
We together. We can't separate it. And I learned this in law school because they would put it as this is the Native American policy. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait, Black Americans going through the same thing. So why don't we have our own set of rules in ruling authority within this country? But their remedy is that 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Now, if we were considered all the way, in my opinion, American citizens, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment is not necessary, because that 5th Amendment already does what the 13th and 14th Amendment supposed to. So now you're adding on an extra layer of equal protection. Protection from what? That 13th Amendment, as you stated. So your 4th and your 5th is being violated by that little clause in that 13th Amendment, which says that if you're in prison, you're a slave. So like you said, you're not reforming anything. You just mask it in a different way. And now we can understand it and dissect it because we're not being colluded with as much trauma as our ancestors was. We're still feeling it, but we can see a little bit clearer now. And that's why I'm for the abolishing of the Constitution, because you cannot operate in something that was meant to harm. And I don't think it's a new phenomenon when people who are of European descent touched those who are of African descent or native to this geographical. I don't think that was already happening in Europe. If you just look at the history of Europe, it has been painted as this wonderful thing that was happening, but it started since the Roman Empire. It has this is not by it. When you say you said collateral consequences, that white people are collateral consequences. No, they're not. They were the start of this.
Now I got Scottish and Irish people in my family, and those that are the indigenous to Scotland and Ireland, they'll let you know that they were colonized over there, right? First, I want to throw something in the mix.
The orphan trains were first with Scottish and what do you call what's other for Scottish?
Irish.
My last name is Irish. The Scottish and
Wales,
So yes, but I think they quickly pivoted, right? When they thought about how to utilize that system instead of harming their own.
When they created
slavery.
When they created whiteness.
That's right. So that's when they became the collateral consequence, right? Because at that
Yes.
point, they didn't consider them to be white because they were not European white.
Right.
But once
Right.
they decided to anyone who had the straight hair and the lighter skin and the possible blue or light brown eyes and didn't really tan well would
Mm-hmm.
be they would just rock together, then that's when they transitioned into the collateral damage because the system became very intent on what was a crime at that point and how crime was to be punished and ensured that when we were released, quote unquote, from slavery, right, because we
Mhm.
never was released, that looking at a white woman was criminal, spitting was criminal,
Emmett Till. All right.
using the bathroom that wasn't marked colored was criminal. And so it was all of these way of life things that had nothing to do with crime that criminalized us and set us up for failure to keep us beneath. Besides the sharecropping and the other things they did, these things was done in conjunction with many other rules and regulations and um, in considerations for the work that we were doing and what we were building. And I just want to tell a quick story about that, right? Because we're still not acknowledged. They ban books and not guns. I was speaking at an Ivy League school last year, and I was just doing my regular speech. You know, I switch it up here and there depending on the audience or whatever it is. And a young white guy said to me, and I was shocked. I have to tell you, I was shocked. I clutched my pearls, girls. So he said, don't blame white people for what black people don't want to do. You don't want to read, that's not our fault. You don't want to finish school, that's not our fault. You want to be somebody's baby mama, that's not our fault. You know, he just went through this whole list of things. And the class, all white, of course, maybe one or two students that looked like me, was looking like, ooh, girl, what you gonna say?
How you gonna respond to that?
Yeah, and I had never been met with such blatant adversity, right? And so I paused, you know, and I took my time.
He
I
let his
processed
mask off.
yeah, I processed what he was saying, and I said, in response, I said, "What is a landmark?" And everybody started smiling and laughing, right? Because they're like, oh, he threw her off her game because we were talking all of this, and this about how black people are oppressed and our systems are designed to be harmful to them. And now her response to his question about whose fault is it really, she's talking about a damn landmark. You could just see it all over all of their faces. And I was like, just entertain me for a second. Somebody tell me what a landmark is. And so I pointed someone out in the class and was like, yo, do you know what a landmark is? Tell me what a landmark is. And that student went on to tell me a landmark is a building that's over 150 years old, where it has state protection, where you can't even change the light switch without getting city or state permission to do so. Like it's completely protected, right? And I said, yeah, 150 years ago, who do you think built it?
Ooh,
I said, we built it. I said,
that
guess
part.
how much we were paid to build it? If anything, I can promise you it wasn't market value of an income that we were paid. Here is a person 150 years ago that couldn't read, write, or do any of that. In most cases, maybe wasn't even allowed to try. But yet they built a building that's still standing that is now protected by the state in which it stands. Whereas the building that fell down last week was built by one of you white boys from this Ivy League school with an architectural degree. You're not smarter than us, and you've never been smarter than us because you got to go to school for years and years and years to build a building that still doesn't stand and will never get landmark protection.
That's right.
So let's just drop that right there, marinate, and think about what you just said, sir.
I
And
mean,
that's the reality.
he got the right one that day. If it feels right, like so. I want to pull up another concept here while we're talking about. I mean, just I feel this gives maybe definition of where you were going with the story, and I want to just go down
Mhm.
the rabbit hole a little bit. So we talked about the title of this series is called Decolonizing Reproductive Care. So I want to unpack together the concept of decolonization. Now, even if I know you engage abolitionism, so I want to gauge how you think about decolonialism as a concept. So this is from a blog piece I did a while ago, and I've been obsessed with Frantz Fanon, who was really a military engager, a revolutionary in the military sense, in the post World War II era, and who was very much about decolonialism and anti-imperialism. But there's this concept of cultural imperialism, which I think we've touched on. I think Myra kind of introduced. So I'm just going to read it. It says the concept of cultural imperialism is used by Fanon to illustrate how the other, as he dubs the colonizer, shout out to, Wakanda. I haven't seen Black Panther 2 yet, but I definitely look forward to it. Violently, let me go back again. Is used by Fanon to illustrate how the other, as he dubs the colonizer, violently imposes their cultural values on the colonized. For the purposes of understanding the violent tendencies of the other, is reflective of the persistent, arrogant, and aggressive behavior of the colonizer, who replaces previous cultural practices with a laughable substitute, one in which the colonized openly expresses to one another in absence of the other. Of significance is that Fanon recognizes here, as he prescribes, that all violent methods of colonization, that for cultural decolonization to happen, the colonized must reject the imposed culture with equal force through the method of showering them with insults and vomiting upon them. Also, he provides an offensive strategy against colonial cultural values by encouraging the usage of a people's language that includes words like brother, sister, comrade, words and concepts outlawed and shunned by the ruling colonialists. Yet Fanon is not satisfied to leave the question of cultural imperialism as imposed social norms, i.e., values that must be rebelled against like a teenager. Rather, the jewel of his argument is in his articulations of land as value currency. He states, for colonized people, the most essential value, because it is the most meaningful, is first and foremost the land. Free the land, right? Shout out to, Malcolm X grassroots movement. The land which must provide bread and naturally dignity. So I share this to, we can unpack a bit. I want to just say a few things before I give the floor back to you guys. So the concept of culture imperialism is something that like the Black Panther Party would talk about in the 60s. They would study Fanon as well. It would be pervasive throughout the anti-colonial movements and the liberation movements in Africa and the Caribbean and in Latin America. And it's very pervasive in W.B. Du Bois era, and saying that, when we have this two-spirit kind of thing going on, the souls of Black folks, part of reclaiming our whole selves is to, one, kill the enemy within. That we first got to address that enemy within that was birthed in us, that says that we must conform to the colonial ambitions of ourselves.
Yes,
and I just want to
ma'am.
frame it within the context of family policing, family regulation, because in my mind, I feel like a big part of why, Black families, Black mothers particularly, get targeted the most in the family policing system is because we show up so different. Right, I agree. We are Indigenous people. I know for a fact we are Indigenous people. I mean, I had the privilege of growing up in segments of our Indigenous cultures, speaking, exposed to Indigenous language, exposed to Indigenous foods. So I can see the parallels when I see my children's father's family who's African American, and my friends and my, Soros, people that I'm in community with, the other mothers that we're in community here in Washington, D.C. with, right? I see the elements that is still preserved. You cannot beat it out of us. You cannot force it out of us. It is in us. We are cultural people, but we are colonized. And so we tend to be kind of subjected to how we're supposed to parent, how we're supposed to show up in the school systems, how we're supposed to show up in a meeting. Everyone is trying to professionalize how we engage with natural things that are oppressing us. So I just want to give it to you and just, what y'all think about this concept of cultural imperialism and decolonialism.
I feel frustrated when I hear that. I feel frustrated because people are always telling us how to be. Just let us be. Um, and I feel even more frustrated when I think about nonprofits, which I call the non-for-profit industrial complex, which is why JMAC has, with intention, began to build how we build. I'm so frustrated. That's something that frustrates me so much. I'm almost at a loss for words, because Black bodies have always been a commodity to everything and everyone in every way. And they tell us that we're not capable of raising children as long as they're not ours, right? We're perfect nannies. We're just horrible mothers, right? And we can't own homes, but we can clean them, right? And it's like we can't be the CEO, but we could do his work because he really don't know nothing. And you want to help our community, but you're not taking the advice and direction from the community. You're just saying you got community leaders that work for you. But how are we leaders when you're the leader and we're following? Like, I just, like, it's all just twisted. And again, white people don't make sense. And I keep telling them, don't tell me that we need another mental health facility in our neighborhood. You need the mental health help. You're the one with the issues and the problems. We are experiencing vicarious trauma from you. You're the one that chose to bring people, humans from another country. You talk about trauma being generationally. Why do we still have generations of white young people who do the things that just happened to that young lady at college where that white girl attacked her? Why? Because generationally, yes, harm is passed down, and your white kids watch you hang other humans from trees. Your children watched you abuse Black bodies. They watched you burn us, stab us, kill us, shoot us, stomp us, beat us, starve us, separate us, lie on us, cheat on us, rape us, molest us, incarcerate us, play medical games with us, experiment on us, use us as science projects, and everything else that I can't even think of in this moment. They are the sick ones. They need the mental health help, and they need to just leave us the fuck alone, because they definitely can't help nobody. They need help themselves.
Joyce, I'm gonna have to follow up right behind Joyce, because I am a history lover, right? And I have my own perspective on that. And going back to what Joyce said, and me going back, it's go further than just their initial conversation with us. Those horrendous things were already happening in Europe. What they do is they make these Hollywood movies, then we're watching these things, and we like, I can't watch that movie till maybe for other people, but as someone who's from Chicago and we've heard that, I can't watch at Jeffrey Dahmer. I can't watch this be sensationalized. That is a sickness, and culturally, that is their sickness, and it's not being racist. It's not being mean. It's not being vindictive. These are facts, right? So even when we say, well, we can be this, but here's the part where we got to take the responsibility. This is accountability within our community as we are decolonizing our mind, because we were met with terrorism. Let's make that very clear. The Great Migration was not great. There was people literally fleeing physical terrorism. So we have to now in this stage have accountability. And just like I said in the last series, we got to fall out of love with our victimhood at the hands of the illusion of white supremacy. That's what we got to start. That's our start now. We're saying, let's just, okay, when it comes to our affairs, you obviously are in a place where you need to heal as a human being. You have to evolve because your culture has been invaded around abuse for so long. It has been fantasized that you have been correct in what you have been living, but you have not. So go focus on yourself. But as we are healing within ourselves, we have to take the accountability. Like I just said, most of the people who are administering the harm in the decision making is those who look like us. We cannot deny that.
So this is what I would say, Maya. Those
to fall out of it. Yes.
What I would say, I'm sorry to cut you off. My ADHD kicks in sometimes. Those who commit no harm does look like us, but the decision makers don't. Because in every organization at the top of the food chain is the white people mostly, right? Especially in these state agencies, because that's how they keep their state business going. I feel like, look at us in 2022. We celebrated the black president who couldn't get anything done because they wouldn't even vote on legislation to support. But that's a whole different story, right? But the point is, regardless of what we think of Obama and what he did or did not do, he was the first black president in all these years of presidency, right? Presidencies that have run 4, 8, and 12 years. He's the first black one. That's government. And government, we are not at the top of the food chain.
But we're the government. Do we not? Are we free or we ain't? Because if we're free, all that right there. You said
I
what?
agree with you, Maya. I said that's why I say it's going to have to be an uprising, because the way the government is structured, right? We are the government. Right? We get to say what it is we need, how it needs to happen. But America has not experienced what other countries have experienced, where people take to the street and really start taking it to the business. The closest they ever came to that was when what's his name had his neck kneeled on, and God forgive me for not being able to say that man's name.
George Floyd.
George Floyd. God forgive me, because I should never stumble on his name, right? That's the closest we came to that.
Right. Right.
That's the closest we came. Every state.
And look at the response, right? The increase of policing and, you know, the militarization part of it, the militarization of it all. So, I mean, I would love to hear what your thoughts on Deidre, but can we try something very specific in the quote that I just said? Fanon specifically says that part of decolonializing or decolonizing is linked to acquisition of land and access to land. Now we know, and Joyce, that's why I lifted up this quote that you put up here, that we can't own homes, but we can clean them, right? That feels like a very specific trauma here in the United States. Access to Black home ownership is very low, but for our families, like I could say, as a renter, as a mom, as a single mom that lives in complexes, I've been sexually harassed by property managers, and when I refuse, you know, the costing of the property manager, that he's going to call CPS, going to call the police. He's going to seek the dogs on my family because, you know, we refuse. And I'm certainly, and I have a little bit more agency than an average, you know, downtrodden single mom. And so, like, it's so pervasive that we are unsafe with our vulnerable children in so many ways in these environments that do not kind of accommodate. So one of the things that that we're exploring, you know, in my nonprofit, and I hear you on the nonprofit industrial complex, which is why we're incubating a cooperative. I'm exploring the cooperative model. We're coming into 2023 with a partnership with One DC, which is an organization here in DC that focuses on housing justice and just cooperative development in general, because we provide mutual aid and we want to support, you know, other families, and we want to be able to do create networks with other family-centered organizations. So whatever's going on in New York, Joyce and Deidre, we want to definitely be a part of it. We know that people want to get down and boogie in DC. They want to politicize in DC, but we're real communities here as well. So we want to be in real community with you. And also when it comes time to take action and hit the streets, you know, hang out at our house and then let's just take it down to Capitol Hill. That's the kind of partnership and camaraderie. And as Fanon says, we got to reclaim our language of brother and sister and comrade, right? That's the people's language. And we want to live not just the words, but the actions behind it. And, Chicago is always ready for some action. So, we're going to bring Chi-Town into this. And one of the mothers that's part of this is in LA. So we really do have a national vision around this, but we must have property where we are safe to raise our kids, where no neighbor can even think to call any of these agents into the community, that we figure out a way to be neighbors without state intervention of any kind. And I just want to know what's going down in New York, what's going down in Chicago. How do you guys see this concept of like that we need real estate? And I know New York is very expensive. I did a couple of years in East New York and Brooklyn. I don't know. I don't know whether it's from the Bronx or Brooklyn, but I know how expensive property was getting even at that time, in the early 2000s. But what do you think of specifically a vision for how land can be part of our abolitionist, future for families?
That's a complex question, because there's a lot even within that. Thinking about just decolonization in general, that quote that you said, we can't own a home, but we can clean yours. I mean, I think back to the so-called child welfare system. We can raise your kids, but we can't raise our own. And so decolonizing to me, um, not to say it in a way that's offensive or that minimizes the word, but it's a part of reform. But to me, I think the way is abolition and reparations. That means that no, we're not going to restore things the way they were, but we have a dream and we have a vision for what the world looks like. And this is what we're going to create and build as we tear the current system down. And so as it comes to land acquisition, that can be tricky, right? Because you have those of us indigenous to these lands and those of us who built and created this country that we have the privilege to enjoy, And so even that conversation creates infighting and tension between two groups who've had such a parallel experience with white supremacy culture, So I think if we dive down that path of decolonization, who does it go back to? But if we talk about abolition and reparations, we get to envision a world that we get to build together based on our principles, our culture, and our values, which were violently stripped away from us, but that we were resilient enough to maintain. So that's kind of how I envision those things.
Thank you for that, Deidre. And Joyce, you're just mentioning reparations. Can you speak on that? What are your thoughts on reparations? How can what's a vision for reparations specifically in ways that overturn family policing systems?
It's hard. I think there's so many different avenues that we could pursue. It's my lack of trust. I mean, we had Black Wall Street, we had places set up, we had richness. They burned it down, tore it down, beat it down. I just have a problem believing that we can create we should be able to. I would like to see us do it. But I think short of providing us just straight dollars to do what we want and the freedom to be where we want and who we want, I don't know. I would say I'm confused because I think if we find a segregated area and we build it up, that they're going to drop bombs on us like they did in Hiroshima, right? I don't think that if we're segregated, that we will ever be safe. We need to be able to live, not saying that I want to be with them, but look at what happened to the movement. It's because they were segregated into a community that they were able to come in and tear down blocks of their housing. So it's not that I want to be with white people, but I think about the risk of being segregated, and I feel like we're sitting targets. And so I think about Give me the cash so I can move out to another damn country. I don't want to live in America no more. Let's just tell the truth. I don't even want to live here no more. We got people coming to America, and I'm
Joyce,
trying to get out.
You think that they wouldn't follow you? You think they wouldn't follow you? I have a serious, real question. Do you think that if there was a mass, I think I've had this conversation with plenty of my family and friends, and you know, we have our conversation where we just keep it within the house, and then we're going public. We really don't have these conversations because we're still in that mindset of fear. Let's just make that very clear, because we're scared to see people's masks come off. That's why I said when the professor said what he said, I appreciate that. Let me see who you are so I can be who I am. We don't have to fake. We don't have to pretend. Real question. It's not like to be sensationalized. Do you think that if there was a mass of Black Americans who did decide to leave, as Garvey planned it out for us, that we wouldn't be attacked? Is that why we won't fall out of our love affair with victimhood? Because we're trying to live in peace, and we know people are just going to come to disrupt.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this as one was born in the third. I was born in the third world. I can't. I mean, I under any other condition, I mean, it's just not to be experienced. I grew up in Nigeria. I spent the first 9 years of my life there. That violence is not is not a small. Is no be small thing we say, right? It's not a small thing, and I mean, it's taken like hood, like kind of science and like what we will call jungle justice, right? Like it's taking that concept to complete unregulated terror if you aren't wealthy, if you don't have access. I mean, I think vulnerable families there, I think it is important that we internationalize for sure, but I just want to be, clear, like there is no out of this. There's no safe place on this planet that I know of. We got nowhere to hide. We just gonna have to engage and think about what it looks like for our children, moving forward. Because, I look at it when my parents came out here, it's going from the frying pan to the fire, because it's also a very unique level of violence that, that the world doesn't understand about the United States, right? That must be told, especially if you're Black, right? Black immigrants coming here and they don't know what's going on. They have no idea, but they're going to find out, and they do find out.
You better know it.
But speaking to that point, a big part of what maintains the white supremacy is the narrative about us in other places, right? Like, oh, they can't get ahead because they just want to complain and they just want to live in the past, completely ignoring all these invisible factors that are maintaining white supremacy in these positions, these policies that, this mandated reporter, to where a person who you're supposed to go to for help is your overseer, is reporting you to a system to preventive services that don't actually help you, and so I think that when I think about just the international impact of us all being colonized, the big piece of it is the narrative. It is narrative change, and it's narrative change in how we think about ourselves and each other. I can't tell you how many people get involved with the so-called child welfare system being reported by other impacted people because of the number they've done on us and how they make us think about ourselves and each other, blaming these macro level issues on micro interactions. And so it may not be resolved by leaving and going to another place, but there is a level of freedom that you possibly could enjoy being in another country, that is not tied and rooted in the way this country's policies have been created. Like if we go from the first policies created for the United States of America all the way up to today, we can see the back and forward of the way people of color, and especially Black people, have been scratching and chipping away at injustice, at this dictation over our bodies and over our lives. But, as soon as Obama is voted out, here comes this regime of utter terror to people of color. Every period of history to where we've had some type of reprieve, some type of progress, it's backed with another era of pushing things back. And I don't know that we would experience that in other countries because of the social implications that come with those policies, which are also created from people's perceptions of us, right? Those policies come from people's beliefs about certain groups and what they think interventions might be to help those individuals, all based in rooted in bias and anti-black racism, um, that may not necessarily be in other countries. So I can see why so many of us have that desire to leave this place in particular. But there's also those of us fighting for abolition because we know that this larger pervasive issue is everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. And I know you dropped in the chat universal basic income and guaranteed income. We know that, I believe in all the universals. We need universal health care. We need universal access to education. We need universal access to wealth, right? Like, you're not going to be able to sustain a house even if you live in one cooperatively in community if you do not have wealth to sustain it. The housing conditions, you're going to get mold, you're gonna get all kinds of things that need money in order for it to raise a high quality of life and keep the state out of our business and affairs in a certain kind of way. So I do want you to speak on that and how you see that work. But I want to quickly transition to the last point, but I'm sure you're going to help me tie this in. But Deidre, do you want to take a moment and let us know how you think about it, how JMAC approaches the concept of universal basic income or guaranteed income?
I mean, well, when we think about repealing CAPTA, a big part of that is that conflation of neglect and poverty. And then we see the way it plays out to where you take my children away because of poverty, but then you give a universal basic income to a foster family when you could have just given it to me to support my family. And so, it is those types of things that shows us just how the system is created to punish us for things that aren't our fault. So I think that universal basic income, just like the civil rights movement, just like any policy in history that has provided privileges to us, those privileges are shared with everyone else, as well. And so, though I would love to say reparations for people of color, Black people, Indigenous people only, we know that the truth is, anytime we want to move something forward, it has to be with everyone in mind, despite who's taking the brunt of the harms from that. And so that's why I personally, I'm not going to put that on JMAC as a whole. But I know that that's the way forward, is that universal basic income policy. But to me, that's a piece of reparations of a much larger conversation of reparations in every domain: a universal basic income, free education, free medical health care for people who have been systemically and historically abused and exploited by these same systems.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to the Guaranteed Income Coalition here in DC and Mothers Outreach Network that is, attempting to connect the dots between, access to wealth and, the over-reporting of child neglect cases, right? They try to draw a direct line to that. But the last thing I want to just kind of introduce here, and Joyce, I really want, I know we're down to the wire. Thank you for giving us your time and your energy here. But, thank you. The work that we do is really centered nexus between healthcare and education at Fixed Pad and She Born Free. And I've been an education advocate for a long time, working with ally organizations to promote this concept of like parent power and caregiver power. But we know that like if we're looking at the world right now, also shout out to Black Swan Academy and who does like police free schools and looks at it from a youth center. And part of how, somehow when I see kind of the youth organizing work, it looks at the parent as the enemy, right? And I feel that that's because they are featuring the white parent, right? They're looking at the white parents that are organizing against critical race theory. They're looking at the white parents that are talking, that will call the police, right? Like it was a white parent group that was promoting for teachers to, have guns in the classroom, right? And I just want to share one last thought and one last slide that came out from a retreat that we had together with Black Swan Academy, this organization, part of our coalition here. And it says, sorry, that's our cultural imperialism. So parents and the police, right? I should put white parents in the police. So I feel like the gift of abolition as an ideology and a practice has given me is the idea that oh no, that's the wrong one. Oh, I hope I had the right one. It's right here. Sorry. The truth of the matter is that the issue is not parent versus student. When it comes to policing in schools, it's wealth and white supremacy agendas versus community and liberation agenda. Schools have always expected parents to organize themselves without any attention to the inequities between parents that have always been there. That's why some schools have parent-teacher organizations, others do not. Some PTOs have large budgets, others do not. Some parents get policed, others use their privileges to get teachers and administrators fired. Without an eye on parents and other family givers, so much organizing support and the unwillingness to define parent power has lost much traction in many social movements. Sadly, conservatives have exercised better understanding of parents as a power base. So, part of like why I wanted Lindsay part of the dialogue was to kind of deepen like how white parents tend to have this kind of reputation that is very diametrically different from Black and brown parents, while we're getting policed and no one's talking about it, and why we need organizing behind us. And it's not just we can't just leave it to our kids, our children, to do all the organizing work. What do you think of that?
What I think is we have to continue to fight. We have to know where we come from to know where we're going. We have to be real about what it is that is happening. We can't be victims to what's happening. We have to stand up, and that means sacrifice, right? Someone asked me, and it was really kind of surprising to me when I was first asked, as I began to grow my platform. Someone of color said to me, "Do I fear for my life?" And I said, "I don't fear for my life." He said, "Well, you're trying to make the change that you're trying to make." And they pointed to Nancy Schaefer, who they claim committed suicide, her and her husband. But of course, there's the belief that they were murdered after she tried to expose what was happening in child welfare. And we have to think about who is involved in trafficking. And something we didn't talk about is how children are trafficked through what they call the child welfare system. They police us to separate us, to gain power over our young people, and to condition their mind, and to make them the human caviar to people with greater financial influence and power. There are a lot of groups who partake in the taking of Black bodies, especially Black children, for reasons of sexual abuse. We don't talk about that readily every day. We don't talk about how the child welfare system is creating a pipeline for those people to rape and abuse our young people and to enslave our bodies and to keep us in captive as sexual objects that are being traded on markets. We are. And if you think we're not, you're not paying attention. And I'm not afraid to speak about it because Life begins where it begins and it ends where it ends. But as long as I'm here, I have a responsibility to tell the truth. I'm not a victim. I am a fighter for change. And I'm a truth agent. And I will live my life as long as I have my life to live. And I will live it free despite how they want me to be. I'm free and I will be free. And that's what I have to say about it. I have to say that we are touching on a very touchy subject. We are organizing in a way around this family policing system that has been unheard of. It is one of the greatest systems of harm that has flown under the radar for 50 years now almost. Right? CAPTA is turning 50. ASFA is turning 25 this Saturday, this coming Saturday. And so we are disruptors. I am a disruptor. And I know they don't like when people disrupt, but this is my mission. And I will carry my mission forward for as long as I have to carry it forward. Today, tomorrow, next week, next year, whatever it is. But the one thing I do promise is I will do this until I die.
Wow. Oof. Thank you so much for that. I love you so much. I mean, just you are light and you're not alone. We got your back. We're right there, side locking arms. We are comrades, we are sisters, we're brothers. We are in this together. Deidre, so you were dropping some really important thoughts, and I want us to can you take us out in this last minute here and just connect the dots between the school to prison pipeline and the foster care system. And we'll call it a night. Thank you, everybody. I hope folks join us next Tuesday. We're going to have Joy James. It's going to be another power-packed moment. Joy James is always giving shout outs to Joyce McMillan. I think I first heard of Joyce McMillan from Joy James.
I was just saying to myself, I'm coming.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Yes,
like
come back. But yes, please help us connect the dots and take us out. And thank you, everybody. Antonio, Christina, ASL, and the community that's observing this and will watch this later on. So, Deidre, your last word.
Yes. Thank you. Oh, no pressure. Last word. But first, thank you to Joyce for inviting me to come up to speak with you today. I think that the way you wrapped it up just speaks to it perfectly because you are that parent that is coming out and doing this fight. And it's going back to narrative, right? Those white mothers out here, we see them advocating because the story gets spun to look at them. But there are so many powerful Black family movements that are happening that are led by parents in this country around education and around abolishing the system as it is and rebuilding something better. The Memphis Lift, the Oakland Reach, Nashville Rise, those are just a few that are doing that work. And the connection is that they're both groups that realize that there is no reforming this. The system is not broken. It was built this way, and it was built to harm our families and our children. And just as Joyce drew those parallels to the carceral system, there are also parallels to the school system in the way many students are forced to be in a place for certain amounts of time, learn a certain way, being told to act and being conditioned and prepared for life as an incarcerated person. And many of the disciplinary practices and things lead to those outcomes for many students. We talked about the connection between children in foster care. Less than 3% get the opportunity to go to college and less than 1% graduate. So there are real connections and real implications about opportunities and economic freedom that are taken away from families when they're involved with the so-called child welfare system and even involved in the school system, which are intrinsically connected through mandated reporting and other policies that feed children into CPS, ACS, that feed children into the prison pipeline. And so those are the connections that I see. And I don't see our work as separate. I just see it as each of us chipping away at a different piece of a system that needs to be abolished as a whole.
Well, thank you so much for that. And we're going to just go down the rabbit hole even further next week with Joy James, political theorist, revolutionary mama, part of our disability community as a neurodivergent parent or parenting a neurodivergent child. And thank you again so much, Joyce. Thank you, Mama Myra. Thank you, Sister Deirdre. Thank you again, Antonio, Christina, even Shanta in the chat, and Lindsay that joined, and anyone else that's catching this. Have a safe and wonderful evening, and we'll see y'all next week.
All right, Maya, hit me up.
Thank you all so much.
All right.